From Silicon Valley, the heart of startup land, it's Getting to Alpha, the show about creating innovative, compelling experiences that people love. And now, here's your host, game designer, entrepreneur, and startup coach, Amy Jo Kim.
Dennis Crowley is the founder and executive chair of Foursquare, a company whose location-based technology powers Uber, Apple, and many other companies you know. Dennis is a pioneer in location-based social experiences and an endlessly creative serial entrepreneur who knows how to navigate the ups and downs that go along with bringing exciting new ideas to life.
I've gone through so much shit in trying to build Foursquare that I feel like I could basically build anything now and get through anything, because nothing can be as hard as it was to build this company. And, in building the soccer team, we had our share of drama and stuff that almost caused us to quit. But I'm like, listen, this is nothing compared to how hard Foursquare was. Let's just keep powering through it. Once you do that a couple times, you kind of get this sense of like, I can just build things and I can just get through problems and I can just push forward. And I think it's really empowering. I would like to help other people to feel the same way that I've been able to feel through building some of these things.
Dennis and I first met on Twitter. I love that he was always tuned into what was new and exciting. Years later, we finally met in person in New York City. And when I walked into a beautiful conference room at Foursquare, I was startled and delighted to see two of my game thinking charts blown up big, covered with scribbles. Yeah, he said, gesturing at the wall. We find those really useful for product planning. And my heart sang, there's nothing like meeting someone who gets it and then who takes it to the next level. That's who Dennis is. Tune in and hear Dennis's ideas on Pokemon Go, entrepreneur payback, and the future of location-based experiences. Welcome, Dennis, to the Getting to Alpha podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm excited for it.
I'm thrilled to get to connect with you and learn more about what you're up to these days. So for those who aren't familiar with you, let's start off with a whirlwind tour of your background. How did you first get started in design and tech? And what were the key turning points for you where you decided to pursue things along the way?
I've been in this building things for the internet space really since I was able to get access to the internet, which goes back to probably 1995 or so when I was a student at Syracuse University in upstate New York. Got really into like web publishing and making home pages and stuff. Ended up moving to New York City after graduation. I got a job at an internet research company called Jupiter Communications. I thought I knew a lot about the internet, and I wanted to be one of those talking heads that was really smart about the internet. So I went to one of the firms that was doing that stuff. While I was there, I got kind of bored of my day job, and I learned how to build prototypes of things. I taught myself out of a book, and I built a city guide called Dodgeball back in, 2002 or something like that. Which then after all my friends got laid off in the dot-com crash, I kind of turned it into a tool that helped people find their friends on their mobile phones. I used that as a way to get into a company called, Vindigo. I worked at this, Palm Pilot City Guide company for a couple of years, went to grad school at NYU, resurrected that old Dodgeball project, during the days when Friendster and MySpace were all the rage. It started getting some traction. We sold it to Google. I was at Google for a couple years trying to, spin a grand tale about what you could do with mobile and social and location-based services. And, we couldn't get as much done there as we wanted to. So we left, and we had to leave our Dodgeball project behind. And so about a year after we left, we started another company called Foursquare. Now we're 8 years into it and continuing to build all sorts of awesome, fun stuff.
Cool. I didn't actually know that Dodgeball was something you were working on before you went to grad school.
Dodgeball was in the early days of me being in New York. There was a period of New York in like 1999, 2000, where the only game in town was this, city search, in terms of like, where are we going to go? Where are these places? And New York was changing so much at that time that there was literally a new street open every week that you could go explore because it was now safer because 5 things opened on it. It was unbelievable. And no one knew anything about these places. because no one was covering it. And I was like, why don't we just why does City Search have to be controlled by these editors? Why can't everyone just be an editor? Why can't you just add your own places and write whatever you want about it? Which was a radical idea back in like 2000. And, that's just started building that stuff. And Dodgeball was the project that taught me how to code, because I tried to take computer science courses in college and couldn't do them. I was kind of too dumb to do it. And I didn't have the math requirements to get into the other classes. So like I eventually just gave up on it. And then years later, just taught myself out of a book. And teaching yourself out of a book is really hard. But if you've got something that you want to build, I was just kind of hopping from chapter to chapter, just hacking things together.
That's awesome. So you were really early in thinking about and pioneering location-based services, particularly social services.
Yeah, there was, that interest came from being in New York. Like in hindsight, all this stuff makes sense. Like there's like a nice drumbeat through all the stuff that I work on, but only in hindsight. Like when I came down to the city, you're totally just overwhelmed. This is, I'm from like a super rural town in Massachusetts, and to be here where there's 10 million people and 10 million things to do, it's just like overwhelming. And like I had an interest in phones and technology and mobile, and I had read Bill Gates's book. I had read Nicholas Negroponte's Being Digital book, which is like like the Bible to me. Like in college, I read that like 5 or 10 times, and it was predicting the future where these things are going to be possible with mobile and location. And I'm like, I want to build that stuff. And when I was in New York, it's just like all these kind of problems emerge. Like, I don't know how to navigate. Where am I going to go? Like, I have friends all over the city. How do I meet up with them? Like, it just seemed ripe for the solving, and you could make clever little things to help people do that.
So when you started Foursquare and Foursquare started to gain traction, it was very influential and partially, I would claim, responsible for launching gamification, because there were very visible game mechanics, in particular in the onboarding. How did those come about? You're not a game designer, but of course, you're comfortable with games. So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, interestingly, you just asked me, to give you a rundown of my career. And, the version that I gave you, it cuts out like a bunch of projects I worked on in grad school. It cuts out a couple other jobs that I worked at, because everyone always wants to talk about the location, location services and geo-aware side of my career. I mean, that is what Foursquare is. But, like I was a gamer growing up, hooked on Zelda, hooked on Street Fighter, and, Sega hockey and pretty much anything else there, right? And so in grad school, I took a class that was about game design. And I was like, I love this, like designing card games, designing board games. And this is at NYU's grad program called ITP. I took a class with a professor named Frank Lance.
Oh, Frank. He's awesome.
Yeah, he runs the NYU Game Center. This is, this is when games weren't taken seriously. And Frank was one of those guys. It's like, listen, games are the future of entertainment, not movies, not TV shows, games. And games can't just be one class taught in this tiny little division. It's like, it's got to be its own thing. Like he is like the captain of this movement. But he taught a class at NYU, at ITP, which was a crazy class at the time. Like, it's a game design course, but we're not going to make games that you play on screens or on a game board. We're going to make games that you play in the city. And I was like, this is like totally my thing. Like this is like my wheelhouse. And we did a group project. Like the whole class did a group project. I think it was the first time that this course was ever taught. And the group project was this thing called Pac Manhattan. We decided let's turn Manhattan into a Pac-Man game for an afternoon. And like if you look at the Google Map version of like what the NYU area looks like Washington Square Park kind of looks like the ghost house, and it kind of looks just like the board. It's really eerie. But we played this awesome game of Pac-Man where people dressed up and they were running around, and there was a little bit of technology and a little bit of cell phones and a little bit of like app development that we did. But then it was a lot of just like, it's almost like performance art. You're running around in the street, like being Pac-Man or being the ghost and playing this game. And this is in 2004. And I remember we got a ton of media coverage for it. Like, what are you grown adults doing running around in Pac-Man costumes? But we were able to tell a story like, hey, we took this class. It's called Big Games. We're bringing game development into the streets, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was a really interesting story. And, Pac Manhattan, it got people excited about this space. We went on to work on a project, me, Frank, and Kevin, and some others called Conquest, which is like a big urban scavenger hunt using 3D barcodes, basically QR codes, but before QR codes were QR codes, and doing it across 5 cities in the U.S. Frank and Kevin went on to start a company called Area Code that did basically big games, like quote unquote big games. Games that take place in the real world. They had a company that was doing this for 3, 4, or 5 years, and I worked for their company for a year. This is after I left Google and before I started Foursquare. And so I was working with Kevin, who's like a genius creative person, and with Frank, who is like a genius game designer. And just through osmosis, I was learning about a lot of this stuff, designing games for cities and designing game mechanics. And that's when I was like, listen, if Google's going to turn off Dodgeball, I'm going to go make another game. I'm going to make another thing called Foursquare. And I'm going to take some of the game design that I've learned here at Area Code and apply it to this thing that we're building. And that's where the game mechanics came from in Foursquare.
That's awesome. When you think about game designing, adding game mechanics, do you think about it in terms of systems?
Maybe. I'm not a classically trained game designer. I think I could, sit down and hold a discussion with folks that are, and probably talk about the same things, but I'm not using not using the language. I don't think I'm using the same language everyone else is using. We do enough of this stuff at Foursquare where, I'm definitely thinking about, hey, you want to design these systems that make sense to people, rules that one user can explain to another user without having to look at a guidebook or a rule book. And certainly want to make sure that all these things are balanced. And I think through my experience at ITP and my experience working on some of these games, both at NYU and at Area Code and on my own, I've learned the bare minimum to make something that's sustainable. But I wouldn't consider myself a game designer or a great game designer or anything like that.
Got it. The reason I'm asking is that a lot of the folks I've been talking to from the UX world are very aware of systems thinking and being able to deal with products as systems as key to their evolution and also hard to recruit for. Paul Adams told me that the hardest thing to find is UX designers who understand systems.
Interesting.
So I was curious if that was something that you were running into, or it was given that you've got more game design background than most people working in design.
Yeah, I guess, system is not part of the vocabulary that I would use normally, So, when trying to find the right people to work on this stuff, generally we go after people that are gamers themselves. And because they understand, they might not be able to articulate it in an academic sense of what they love so much about game X versus game Y, but they have a innate kind of intuitive sense of this is fun and this is not, and this is easy and this is hard, and this makes sense and this doesn't. And we've been able to find some amazing visual graphic designers along the way that just happen to be huge video game nerds. It's listen, we're trying to make something awesome with this Swarm game that we have. Just make something that you want to use. Make something you think your friends would want to use, which is kind of the thinking that we've applied to make Dodgeball back in the day. Let's make something that our friends want to use. To make the early version of Foursquare, let's make something that our friends really love using. And so, we're kind of teaching that internally here at Foursquare, the company. It's okay if you're not classically trained in some of this stuff or formally trained, but just make stuff that you're passionate about, that you think other people are going to be really jazzed about too.
Awesome. Do you have much interaction with entrepreneurs who seek you out and want your advice? Is that a world you travel in?
It is. It's, I try to make a lot of time to meet with folks. And I just came off of paternity leave. I just had a baby daughter. So I haven't done so much this in the last 2 to 3 months. But, normally I have a 9 to 10 a.m. coffee slot on my calendar, that I just leave open. And sometimes I meet with reporters, and sometimes I meet with students, and sometimes I meet with high school kids. And I'm happy to talk to anyone that is just looking to get started with stuff. And the reason I do that is because when we were doing Dodgeball, we had this moment where at NYU, and it's oh my gosh, instead of us going and getting jobs at someone else's company, Dodgeball could be our company. We didn't know how to take it from an idea to a job. We didn't know about venture capital. We didn't know about pitch decks. We didn't know any of this stuff. And New York at that time, 2004, 2005, was a very different place than it is now. Like there just wasn't infrastructure of entrepreneurs that had done this before that you could ask for help. And so, I mean, I try to help people on Twitter or on email or over coffee as much as I can, because I think a lot of times you just need a little push in the back or a pat on the back. It's like, you're doing the right thing. It's okay if you don't have a paying job right now. You just push through this and maybe this thing will work out. Or this pitch deck is fine. Sure, you got 5 no's, but most people get 30 no's. So just keep doing what you're doing. And, like we certainly needed that at some times in the past. And I feel like I can help people even just a little bit. And maybe I can help them push them just a little bit further in what they're doing.
That's awesome. And it also gives you some really interesting patterns it keeps you in touch with what's happening. So I'm really interested, what are the common mistakes that you see first-time entrepreneurs and designers making? Not so much about the business and, raising venture, because that's one, but when they're in the early stages of bringing their ideas to life. This is something you've been through multiple times. This is the core of the work I do, helping entrepreneurs bring their ideas to life. What are some of the really common mistakes that you see people make?
A good question. I could probably give you 10 different answers for it. On the top of my head, one question I always get every time I give a talk about entrepreneurship stuff is, how did you come up with the idea for Dodgeball and Foursquare? Did you write down 100 ideas on a whiteboard and then go through the market size of each one? And I'm like, that is absolutely the opposite of what we did. What we did is we built something that we wanted to use that we thought our friends would want to use. And we built a small, little, shitty, crappy prototype of it. And we let them use it as soon as it was usable. And then we got feedback and we refined it. And along the way, everyone told us, this is a stupid idea. It's never going to work. No one's going to want to use this. You should just go get a job. And we just kept building and tweaking and building and tweaking until we turned it into something interesting. And so there was no mathematical formula or analysis that helped us figure out what was a good idea. We just kind of were passionate about it. And when everyone told us that it was a dumb and stupid idea, we said, well, we don't think so. We want to keep doing it. So we'll just keep working on it. And, I think there's some people that they might take that advice, they might take criticism too seriously early on. Yeah, maybe this is a lousy idea. Maybe I won't do it. Maybe I'll just go back to not working on this thing. I think that's a danger.
You said something really critical there that was in the subtext, which is that, one, you solved a real need. It was a need you had, but you were solving a real need, not creating technology in search of a problem. And you were getting that need into the world in super crude form as early as possible.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been the way that we do it. It's just like our thesis has been build something if we can build something that you yourself want to use, there's a good chance that your friends would also want to use it. And there's a good chance that their friends would want to use it too. Now, if you build something and you're like, this is so dumb, I wouldn't even use it myself. Then you've got a separate set of problems. Or if you build something you like and your friends don't get it, then you got to go back and refine it. But that's always been the main thesis. Do I want to use it? Do my friends want to use it? Can they explain it to their friends in a way that their friends want to use it? And if you've got that going, then you've got something good happening. The build quickly and ship quickly and iterate often thing, that's also tied to my skills as a programmer. I'm not a very good programmer. I'm a really awful programmer. I can build stuff that gets the point across, but it only works 75% of the time. But if you can do that in such a way that gets people excited, you get people to join you and help out and oh yeah, this is great. I want to work with this thing you do and I can help make it better. So, launching quickly was, launching bad code quickly wasn't a choice. It was kind of like a necessity. That's the only thing I knew how to write.
Right.
And we would just, constantly just push out prototypes. And we would do this even when we were at Google, just push out little features of Dodgeball and just see how people like them. And I always think that's lots of fun to do.
Totally. So I can't resist. You're a pioneer in the field and you've got this great perspective on gaming and social local. What do you think about Pokemon Go?
Oh, I mean, I think the Pokemon stuff is awesome. Like I was a gamer and, I was. I mean, like I still am. I don't have much time to play now, but, I played Pokemon on Game Boy, years ago. And, I think it's like, I understand the franchise. I understand the value in the IP and the franchise. And so, when the game comes out and you see people running around the real world, trying to catch these things, and everyone's like, what are they doing? They're just wasting their lives trying to get these Pokemon. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, I've spent 10 years of my career trying to build software that encourages people to do things they wouldn't normally do. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys that designed Pokemon have kind of cracked the code. Like they made a version of this that tens of millions of people are now using. And that's awesome because it pushes the whole space forward. And, one of the things I'm excited about now, because we're in like a post Pokemon world, is, and this is an important point. I've been telling people at Foursquare about it. Like the reason that Dodgeball worked when it did is because we were able to say, it's like Friendster, but for your cell phone. And when I say that, I mean like Friendster did all the hard work of teaching people about asymmetrical friend graphs. There's a whole bunch of startups that are like the Twitter for this or the Uber for that, because, Twitter and Uber did the hard part of teaching people about big parts of infrastructure. In the next 6 months or so, there's going to be lots of, it's like Pokemon Go, but for this. And what that means is like, it's a game that's built into the real world. Like they've communicated a very, very tricky topic. There's a game board on top of the map of the world. And they've just taught that to tens of millions of people. And like, now it's just pop culture and people understand it. And, I'm thinking, hey, everything that we've done with, we have a location-based game called Swarm, which is, also very successful here. But we can start pitching that as like, oh, Swarm is kind of like Pokemon Go, but for places instead of, pocket monsters. And it's just like an interesting way to get to describe the space. I feel like everything got moved forward, 10 or 20 yards, if you want to use like a, football analogy. And now people can start building on top of this shared cultural literacy that Pokemon helped create.
That is a fantastic perspective. I completely agree. I think the game is brilliant. It's highly imperfect and it's brilliant.
It's going to inspire kids that are playing it to like, holy cow, I want to make a Pokemon Go when I grow up. And it's going to inspire game developers to be like, okay, I want to make something like that. Who would have guessed it's a hit? And then, I'm wearing my chief executive chair at Foursquare hat right now. But a big part of our business is licensing technology to enable people to build amazing location-based services. Mm-hmm. And so like our business development team has been very, very busy this past week being like, people are like, hey, can you help us make something like this? It's like, yes, we're very, very good, at helping people build, strong location and contextual aware products. So if you would like to build a game, of course, we can help you do that.
You've got the database.
Well, we have the database with the technology, like the killer technology that we've made is, if you look at Pokemon as awesome as a game as it is, and I love it, and I'm only level 9. My wife is now like level 11, and I don't think I'm ever going to catch up. It really saddens me. But,
how is she getting all those steps in?
Well, because she's home with the baby right now, and so she's like, I'm going to take the baby for a walk. I'm like, you're not taking the baby for a walk. You're taking your Pokemon guy for a walk.
Oh, she's going we go for Poke walks at our house. It's a special kind of walk.
Meanwhile, I'm at the office, which is basically like Pokemon jail. So there's no creatures running around here. So I'm at a huge disadvantage.
Oh, I see. Wow. The office has become Pokemon jail. Now that's a mental model.
Yeah. I got to break out so I can go, level myself up a little bit.
Oh my God. That's so funny. But so tell us a little bit more about Swarm and Foursquare and just the fundamental assets that you've developed. How long have you been doing Foursquare now? How many?
I think it's like 8 years.
Yeah.
So, 8, 9 years.
Yeah. So you've split the product.
Yeah.
For those who aren't aware, Swarm is the game.
Yeah. So we have the company's called Foursquare. Mm-hmm. We have 2 apps. One is called Foursquare, which is, probably the best app in the world for helping you find great places to go anywhere in the world. And then we have our check-in game, which is called Swarm, where, if you go to bars, restaurants, cafes, gas stations, whatever, you check in, it takes you 10 seconds, you win coins, you can spend the coins, you can become the mayor of a place. It's like an item collection game, sticker collection game.
Right.
And there's millions of people who play it every day, which is great and as people are having a fun time playing Swarm, every check-in teaches us a little bit more about the real world. Is this place still open? Is this place still interesting? Is this place open at 11 p.m. or does it close at 10 o'clock? Like every check-in that we get about 8 million per day. I think we've got about 10 billion total. Every check-in teaches us something about some place in the world. And it's just this engine that's constantly learning.
You've built dynamic database technology.
Among
other things, but let me tell you why I'm bringing this up. I just read Kevin Kelly's new book, The Inevitable, which is very thought-provoking and reminds me of you talking about reading Nicholas Negroponte's book. It blew open some doors in my mind. It talks a lot about managing dynamic situations, moving from nouns to verbs, and just lots and lots of examples. And data sets and databases are fundamental. And so many people are stuck with, managing content and hoarding content, especially in publishing. Mm-hmm. And then, but there's this quote unquote new way, but not new to you, because that's what Foursquare is. It's a dynamic data set. And it goes back to you saying, hey, this restaurant is new and it's not in the city search. And it should be. So that is something that, maybe I'm not using the same terms you use, but that you, as a company, you've got to be incredibly good at that. And it's a very, very hard thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, we would say the language we use is like, it's a crowdsourced map of the world. This is, you're exactly right. Actually, you just kind of blew my mind because I never even thought about like the early version of Dodgeball from 2001 inspiring the database within Foursquare, but you're absolutely right about that. I never even made that connection myself. But yeah, this idea that like, hey, there's places in the Lower East Side of New York that aren't in city search in 2000, in 1999, 2000 is exactly the same thing as like there's new restaurants opening up outside of Istanbul and Swarm users and Foursquare users are telling us about them so we can add them to the global map. The Foursquare database is, there's we have 85 million places in there. I mean, it's literally every bar, restaurant, coffee shop you could think of in the world, but it's also like every landmark, every, hut that's selling, frozen drinks on some beach in Vietnam, like every bench that someone's interested in checking into that happens to be on a college campus, like every place that someone has thought was interesting enough to check into is in our database. And it's just this killer living map of the world. Now that's one asset that we have. Now the holy grail of, for me and building all this stuff for the longest time has been, we didn't want to build just like this thing that you have to check into. We didn't want to build a check-in button. What we wanted to build was a service that can teach you about the world as you walk through it. And in order for that to happen, you have to be able to understand when a phone goes inside of a place, how long it spends there, when it leaves, where does it go next, where was it before, where does it go tomorrow, does it go back to the place? You have to understand how phones move through the real world. But you have to also realize that people aren't going to hit the check-in button every single place that they go. So how do you build a piece of technology that just, can basically check you in the background? And that didn't exist when we built Dodgeball, which is why we invented the check-in. It didn't exist when we built Foursquare, which is why we had to bring the check-in back in. And over the last 8 years, we basically built this technology. And internally, it's called Pilgrim. And Pilgrim is this idea of, if your phone is running Foursquare technology, you can just go to the laundromat and we know that you're at the laundromat. You can then take your phone into the butcher next door or the cupcake shop and we know that you were there for 3 minutes. You can take it into the Gap and we know that you were there. You can take it into the coffee shop. We know that you were there. And from this, we can start to understand, these are the places that Dennis likes and these are the places that Dennis doesn't like. And we can use that to start making personalized recommendations and personalized maps. Like my fantasy version of Foursquare is a version that you don't have to use. It's an app you never have to open. It's something that just, texts you, once a week or twice a week and says, hey, listen, I know, Dennis, I know everything about where you go in New York, and I found the perfect place for you and Chelsea to go for dinner. And it's this place in your neighborhood, but it's down this street that you haven't walked down in 6 months, And like that's why we started the company, to build this thing. Coincidentally, now that I'm off paternity leave, I have a group here and we build this stuff. We have an app called MarsBot. It's actually in the App Store now, which is like a prototype of this version of Foursquare you don't use, just one that texts you with recommendations, depending on, that are personalized and based off of where you've been in the past. And that's our version of the future. And we think, tens of millions of people are going to use software like that in the future.
Wow, that's hits like 4 themes in Kevin Kelly's book.
Yeah, there was a lot there. See, when you let me go unchecked, I just keep talking.
Oh, I love it. But and as you were talking, I was thinking, that sounds like the best interface for that would be a bot. And then lo and behold, it's a bot.
The bot stuff is like all the rage right now, but all the bots are like, like a genie in a magic lamp, right? Like you have to summon the bot. You have to rub the magic lamp to get the genie to come out. Hey, Alexa, hey, Siri, like that. I don't want, that bot's fine. But what we're trying to build is a different bot. It's a bot that like taps you on the shoulder and says, Dennis, go left instead of right. Like, Dennis, look up. Dennis, go to the ice cream place around the corner. It just opened and it's awesome. And everyone's talking about it. You've never even noticed it before. Like, I want that bot. And so that's what we're trying to build here.
Yeah. And to get people to use that bot, they have to be super comfortable with surveillance.
I don't think it's necessarily surveillance. It's just this idea that,
let's call it tracking.
Well, it's some friends of mine that work at Microsoft have this idea of like, they're called listening machines, machines that listen to what goes on in your life. And therefore they're able to, make sense or help out in certain ways. Like we already have this, right? Like, Gmail reads all your Gmail appointments, like it reads all your email and it surfaces various things to you. Like Google now looks at everything that you've done on the internet and it tries to figure out like, oh, this is what you probably want right now. Like we're already at this point where the machines are aware of what we're doing on them and they're trying to be helpful. And I think what we're doing is we're taking it one step further because we're invoking location. What can the software learn from where I take my phone? Does it know that I like this neighborhood over this neighborhood? I like cheap restaurants over expensive restaurants. I like sushi, but I hate cupcakes. Like we're just solving one tiny sliver of the software enhancing your life puzzle. And we're doing it for places because that's the thing that we're really good at.
Yeah. And that's something that is interesting. But to me, the key is what you do with the data and the interface you present. There's a startup that actually just went out of business that was formed a couple of years ago by my friend Siki Chen, who comes out of casual gaming. And a lot, he just comes out of like viral manipulation, that part of casual gaming. And their startup was called Hey, Hey. And they did exactly that, Dennis. You didn't have to check in and they tracked everything you did and showed you little pictures. Mm-hmm. But it failed. And it failed because and then what? Okay. And then what? Which is kind of what takes us back to Pokemon Go. There's been, a lot of people in AR gaming are like, this is not new. I did almost exactly this 10 years ago. But Pokemon Go is that magic combination of gameplay, brand, and cultural readiness.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's totally right. But that said, Pokemon Go is going to have its and then what moment, Oh,
it already is.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm level 8. 80% of the monsters and things that I catch, I already have them, and I'm not as enthralled with it as I was a couple days ago, last week. So, I mean, like any game designer will tell you, it's very difficult to build something that holds someone's attention for a long period of time. Like I feel that we have gotten super lucky and super fortunate with Foursquare game mechanics have made the jump to Swarm. And a lot of these things have lived on for 8 years and people still love it and they still play it. And the game resets every week and people are digging it.
The Pokemon Go gym mechanic is right out of Foursquare, or they're both right out of the same thing, which is owning turf. in a
Yeah,
neighborhood.
which is, goes back to like the dope wars, from Palm Pilot days. You could actually play it on like your calculator way back in the day. Like you own turf and you're defending turf. And so it's just a mechanic, but I think what's interesting is like you tied the mechanic to physical places in the real world. And I think what's also kind of nuts is like, this space is small, right? The number of people that have been working on this stuff over the last 10 years or so, you could fit us all in a conference room, probably in some event. And so, like everyone's been inspired by everyone else in a certain way. So like, it's fun to think like, hey, we were inspired by Nike Plus. And then, Nike Fuel might be inspired by something else. And then Pokemon's going to inspire something else. And I hear from people that are like, I was inspired by Foursquare game mechanics. Like you basically, you got this mix of like creative folks and entrepreneur types that have invented things that whether they work or not, succeed for a long time or fail, you basically put them in this mixing pot, you kind of stir it around and everyone reaches in there from time to time and they say like, well, now I'm going to make, Foursquare for X, or I'm going to take Pokemon and combine it with this and combine it with that. And then we're going to have something new. And, I think it's great to see this, like to look back and kind of see the lineage of, hey, there's 100 location-based games or AR games or GPS games that never hit the mainstream, but you can see little traces of them existing in everything else that's successful right now.
Absolutely. So what trends are you following right now? Whose work are you paying attention to?
I kind of just pay attention to like a lot of kind of the macro stuff. Like, are people using Twitter more or less because of Instagram, which people are using more or less because of Snapchat, which people are using more or less because of something else I haven't heard of yet? Like we're at this point now where like there's a handful of these networks that are just super, super dominant. Besides that, if we did this interview a month ago, I'd be saying like, there just hasn't been something new that comes out in a while. There hasn't been like a new disruptive thing in a bit. Now, Pokemon is a thing that has everyone's imagination right now. And I think I'm especially tuned into it because I've been in this location-based services, location-based games thing for so long that I'm like, oh my God, someone hit the jackpot with this. This is great. And so I don't know if other people are as inspired and excited about it as I am. But, think about it, like the Apple Watch came out and it didn't really transform anything. There's no new sensors in the phone for people to take advantage of. We're kind of in this lull right now. And there hasn't been like a big jump. People keep saying it's going to be AR, but it hasn't been. And I don't think Pokemon is like the start of this AR revolution. I still don't know if AR is going to be a thing. There's virtual reality, wearing the headsets, like you can now buy them in Best Buy, but like I don't see people playing those things yet. So I think we're still in this like, what is going to be the next big thing moment, even though there's a couple things that are fighting to be that right now. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. What are the couple of things fighting to be it? You mean like there's AR and VR. Yeah. By the way, I completely agree with you that it's not a done deal. VR got really overfunded. My daughter is such a perfect example. She's 9 and she sees VR because she watches YouTube videos where most education happens these days. Yeah. And sees her hero, Dan TDM, with VR. And I need VR. So a friend of mine's developing some Google Cardboard VR games. So we did a play test. I got a Google Cardboard so we could play test my friend's game. Then we downloaded every Google VR game in the store. Mm-hmm. 20 minutes later, she was kind of over it. Yeah. And the next day, she kind of picked it up. When a friend came over, she showed him. It's just sitting there.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go. It's a bunch of demos. Like you said, it's hard to drive long-term engagement.
Well, it's a new medium and people haven't figured out what to do with it yet. Here's a perfect example of like, in Snapchat, people are like, this is a toy. There's nothing interesting here. It's a toy.
Ho, ho, ho.
But then as it starts to pick up speed, it's like, no, this is the medium at which millennials now, can't believe I just used the word millennials, but this is the platform by which they express themselves. It's a brand new medium and people have to learn how to use it. And AR is that, and VR is that, and mobile is that, and whatever's next is that. And so when you ask me what's next, it's not one of these things. As soon as you asked me, I specifically thought back to, I remember like when we were doing Dodgeball, before we went to Google, I had a pitch deck, and the pitch deck showed a mobile phone, plus Google Maps, plus a Friendster. Right? It's like social plus mobile plus location. That's the thing, It's not one of those things. It's all of those things put together. So whatever's next is going to be, what are those three things? Is it, okay, real world game that you play in the real world, plus fitness tracking, plus AR, plus front facing camera? It's like, I don't know. What does that thing even look like? Maybe we're too old to figure that out. And that's something for your daughter to figure out. But like that, I think that's how it happens. It used to be this thing in like 2005. People talk about, oh, it's like remix culture. Everyone's taking all this stuff and just remixing it with everyone else. But that just happens over and over and over again. And now there's just, the toolbox is so much bigger and more advanced and more sophisticated that people can just make awesome things because all this other technology has been getting built over the last 10 years, and Foursquare being one of the pieces that exist in that toolbox.
Yep. And one of the more sophisticated pieces.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so. That's one of the things that we're super proud of. It's so funny. Like people always say, oh, Foursquare, I haven't used that app in a long time. Like, how are you guys doing? And I'm like, we're doing just fine. Like there's 50 million people around the world that are, using either Foursquare or Swarm. And then we have figured out a way to basically monetize a lot of the data that's coming in and the technology that we've developed so that we can continue to finance building and innovating great things here. So people are like, oh, but I don't check into places. I'm like, that's fine because there's still 8 million check-ins we're getting every day. And even though you don't know it, Foursquare technology is inside of Twitter, is inside of Uber, is inside of Apple Maps, is inside of, Pinterest and Yahoo and Microsoft. And, that's great for us. It allows us to keep building the things that we're excited about.
Absolutely. And that's, again, so connected to the path that led to Pokemon Go. That was not possible without years of Ingress tagging the world.
Yeah, well, Niantic has this interesting data set that came out of the Ingress game, and I'm sure they're getting interesting data from Pokemon as well. I think I mentioned this, early in the interview, but like one of the things that I'm really excited and inspired about is if I was sitting on an airplane, like I have to go to San Francisco next week, and someone says, "What do you do?" And I say, "I work at Foursquare, and we have this app called Foursquare and Swarm." Well, what does Swarm do? I have to say, okay, well, Swarm it's like a game that you play in the real world and you go to places and you check in and that's kind of the game. And as you check, it's a mouthful. But now I can sit next to someone and they're like, well, what is Swarm? It's like, well, what Pokemon Go is? Like, yeah. It's like, well, it's like Pokemon Go, but for places instead of the monsters. Like you play it at the places that you go to. And that instantly makes sense to people because of that cultural literacy that now exists. It's like a different world now, in a sense, at least for us, because we don't have to go out and explain all this stuff. Someone else has already done it for us.
That is so interesting. Your perspective is just fascinating to me. So on a completely 180-degree different note, you've got a new startup project that's deeply rooted in the physical world. You're growing a local team.
Yeah. I started a soccer team from scratch. It's something that I kind of had in the back of my head for a long time about, I'd love to do this someday. We just kind of pulled the trigger on it last fall and we just finished our first season. It's been a lot of fun to do it. The soccer club, it's a semi-professional team. We're in the 4th division of the U.S. soccer pyramid. So I don't know if people follow the MLS, we're a couple levels below MLS. And it's based in the Hudson Valley of New York, which is about 2 hours north of New York. And the team is called the Stockade FC. What I'm trying to do is take all the lessons I've learned from startups, Dodgeball and Foursquare, apply them to building this community-based soccer team, and then publish everything that I'm learning in an effort to encourage other people to start similar clubs in their own hometowns. And now I'm advising 8 or 10 different people that are interested in starting these teams, which is it's like a kind of fun, noble thing. It's also, I'm really enjoying getting to put a lot of this stuff together.
Wow. So you really like helping entrepreneurs who are coming up. Part of doing the same thing is when you make your coffee hours.
Basically, right? Like, I advise, basically advising people on how to make these soccer teams over email in the same way that I would try to guide an entrepreneur to getting financing. And I'll tell you what, it's really empowering to have an idea that doesn't exist and then to go make that and to see it work. And I think there's lots of people that have the ability or capacity to do that, but they don't get the chance to do it. And I think once you do it, and this sounds weird, but like I've gone through so much shit in trying to build Foursquare that I feel like I could basically build anything now and get through anything, because nothing can be as hard as it was to build this company. And, in building the soccer team, we had our share of drama and stuff that almost caused us to quit. But I'm like, listen, this is nothing compared to how hard Foursquare was. Let's just keep powering through it. Once you do that a couple times, you kind of get this sense of like, I can just build things and I can just get through problems and I can just push forward. And I think it's really empowering. I would like to help other people to feel the same way that I've been able to feel through building some of these things. It sounds kind of corny, but I would like to help people do more of that.
Well, it actually sounds like that's your superpower.
Yeah, maybe, if I can, I think that my superpower might be the fact that I have this, this sense of like, I can build it and I can do it. And the confidence that I can actually get some of that stuff done because I've actually built a couple things. And now I want to see if I can use that to inspire other people to build the things that they want to build. With the soccer stuff, it's like, I'm a fan of the game and I play, but I'm awful. But I don't know anything about starting it. I don't know anything about managing it, growing it. We had to learn all this stuff from scratch. And I kind of want to make a big deal about like, we didn't know what we were doing. We were like the least likely people to ever make something like this. But we made it and it worked and it was successful. And now we're going to teach other people how to do it. And I think, there's something that even like inspires me in that. And so I want to help other people be able to like get past the fear of not doing their own thing and getting to go build the things that they want to see in the real world.
Did you use the same techniques of early prototyping and getting feedback to bring the soccer team to life as you do with software? Sort of an iterative prototyping process?
The thing about the soccer team was that it was so hard to get people excited about it because there was no prototype. It's like you're basically launching V1 is like when the guys show up on the field and they play for the first time. Instead of the thing crashing or not, it's like, are these guys any good or are we going to get beat 6-0? And it turns out that the team was pretty good. So that worked out pretty good. It was a good beta for us. But I had a hard time early on getting fans and sponsors and even lining up the fields because people are like, what are you doing? Can you show me a picture? I'm like, no, it doesn't exist yet. And like, you're basically building it from scratch. That's tough. But, I did kind of run around a bunch and say, hey, I'm thinking about putting the soccer team here, making it from scratch. What do you think? And by talking to people, it helps refine your pitch and it helps, spread the word a little bit and it helps me get better about talking about it. And I find the things that really resonate with people. And so, it was it's not the same, but it was definitely similar. And even though like you would think like there's no overlap between a tech startup and a soccer startup, you got to inspire people. You got to actually get stuff done. There's going to be people that want to help and you're going to have to manage them and organize them. And a lot of the skills are the same. And I imagine even if we did something else that was crazier than this, I don't even know what it would be, the skills would transfer to that as well.
Something from nothing.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I like to do. I think I figured that out just a couple of years ago. I just turned 40 this year. And so to have,
Mazel tov.
Thank you. Yeah. But to have finally figured that out, it's like, that's what I like to do. I like to build something from nothing and see it turn into something great. And then, let's see what the next thing we can build is. And, we've got like a 10-year plan with the soccer team. And I think we're just going to keep building and building and building and see how big we can get it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories and perspective and inspiration for what's coming up. I'm thrilled with getting to know you better and just loved hearing all your stories.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for teasing it all out of me. And thanks for, talking for a little bit. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to Getting to Alpha with Amy Jo Kim, the shows that help you innovate faster and smarter. Be sure to check out our website, gettingtoalpha.com. That's getting2alpha.com for more great resources and podcast episodes.